due to the large number of people watching my videos about configuring joysticks and the number of questions I got, I decided to create a new video. What are we going to do in this video? We're going to configure the Turtle Beach VelocityOne flight system for a 2-engine aircraft. Let's roll the intro and then let's configure the quadrant. So we're inside the aircraft again. So let's go to the settings, right? We're going to configure the quadrant as mentioned already. And the reason we're only going to configure the quadrant is because the yoke itself is, I would say, 100% the same as the one which we, or the steps which we did in the previous video about how to configure the yoke for the single engine aircraft, the Cessna 172. So you can either say copy this one, right, which we created, the custom MSFS, and then copy that one. And that will be also, let's say, applied to this aircraft. Or you can, I would say, configure a separate one for the, I would say, 2-engine aircraft. But it's really up to you. But in this case, we're going to go and focus on that flight quadrant, right? So as you can see, right, there are multiple profiles, right, already there. So we're going to simply start with copying again, right? Remember that we did it last time. If you didn't see a previous video, don't worry. I will take you to all the steps which are needed to configure that quadrant. So we're going to click on the gear, click on duplicate, and then say, okay, hey, we're going to give it a name. In this case, we're going to give the name VelocityOne Flight, and then quad, and then custom MSFS, 2-engine. Fortunately, you can't copy the name, so we need to do the same thing over here, right, with the other one. We're going to say duplicate, and then we're going to retype the name. It would be nice if Asobo, say, would add a way to add or to copy those names. Quad, custom MSFS, 2 engines. Again, we don't select the apply to all aircraft, as well as we don't select the set to default, unless you specifically want to use all the configurations for, or this configuration for all the aircrafts. You can apply these options, but for now, I will say leave it as is. So with that said, right, we can still go to the assigned ones, and there we see the default configuration. But as mentioned, we're gonna remove this. And the reason we're going to do this is because in some cases you will see that there are a lot of joysticks or buttons assigned to multiple options, as well as that they are not mapped to the ones which are described in the default Turtle Beach configuration. And that results in also that you're, say, completely need to restart learning the quadrant because it's completely different from Flight Simulator 2020, right? So let's clear those entries by clicking the clear button over here, and it will clear everything, right? So we're good to go now, and we can, let's say, start from scratch. So first of all, we're going to start with that trim wheel. I'm going to search for elevator, trim, and if you don't see it, then make sure that you set it to none or to essential. In this case, we're going to assign it to the axis trim 0 to 100. In some cases, you need to try it a few times. I'm not sure what's causing this behavior. It could be my joystick, but it could also be, let's say, the flight simulator. Because if it doesn't work, as you can currently see that it doesn't work, you simply need to try it a few times, and then it likely works. Not always, but let's say, don't worry, you're not the only one. Believe me. So let me try it again. It's always hard to get this one configured, right? I'm not sure what's causing this behavior, but say it's so nasty. Let me try again. Wrong device. Yeah, I know. So really slowly moving it, but it really doesn't do it. So for some reason it doesn't pick it up, right? But if you look at the left top of this video, you will see which control I'm gonna assign to it. So believe me that I have done it. But I'm going to try it one more time. But as you can see, it doesn't work. I hope it works in your case. If not, then let's report some bug issues with Asobo, because I think it's a really nightmare. It could also be my joystick again. So If you have this issue, also let me know via the comment box below this video. Else, I'm gonna report an issue with Turtle Beach about my joystick. So that's the one. So next one is that we're gonna skip all those, I would say, quadrant levers. And the reason for that is that I'm gonna do it a little bit later. So what we did in the previous video for the single engine, we didn't configure any of them. In this video, of course, we will because we've got those two engines. But we're going to continue first with the buttons, right? The buttons are the B3 until the, I would say, what is it? B12. And B3 is start the engine. In this case, be aware that if you start the engine, that you of course need to say start two engines, right? Because you've got not one engine, but two engines in this aircraft. So you might want to say configure this differently. So set engine 1 master, set engine master 4 master. You can see we've got multiple engines. But in this case, what we need to search for, of course, to start the engines. Now, the first thing you can, or one of the things you can do is set it to auto start the engine. It will make your life a lot easier because it auto starts the engine. However, it could become a little bit more unrealistic. So be aware of that you can do it, but it becomes a little bit more unrealistic. But again, it's up to you, right? So for this video, I would say do it, but I already challenge you to find out another way to start the engines because I don't think it's, let's say, as realistic as possible, right? Normally you want to start one engine and then start the other engine. So that's the first part. Then the next one is that we're going to configure the parking brakes, right? The parking brakes are the next button, as we've all seen, parking brakes. We're going to use it to toggle the parking brakes, and we're going to press that B4 Bravo 4, which is then set. Then the next one, of course, is the auto throttle. Auto throttle, and then we're going to make sure that we're going to select this button, and that will be button number 5. You can see that this one is different compared to the single engine, where this B5 button is assigned to a different function. But cool. Then to make sure that we can also reverse the engines, we're going to set the toggle throttle reverse button thrust, which will, if you press that button and then if you increase the throttle, it will go in the opposite direction, right? So you will say go in back or drive backwards. And that sometimes is really useful. So we're going to configure it. Button number, so what is it? 6, mapping to button number 4 on the joystick. And then we've got the flaps. Now, here's a suggestion, right? So you can do two things. You, of course, can adjust your flaps using these buttons, right? But then you need to do it like this. Then you need to decrease the flaps to button number 7, and the other one to increase the flaps to button number 8. However, if I were you, I wouldn't do it. And the reason for this is because you also have that leveler number 4, which I will show in a few seconds or a few minutes, which you can use to control the flaps. So you could also decide to assign these two buttons to a different, I would say, function. But for now, because I followed the manual, right, the default manual about how those buttons are configured, I will leave it as is. Then we've got the autopilot master, right? The autopilot master is to configure the, or to enable the autopilot master switch. And the autopilot master switch is the toggle autopilot master, and that will be button number 9 already. And that's button number 7 on the joystick. If you're playing on the PC, if you're playing on the Xbox, it's a different one, but that's a different story. Then the taxi lights, which are over here. Toggle the taxi lights, button number 10. And then landing gear. Oh, landing gear, I say. Here we've got it. Number 11. And then button number 12 is the landing lights. So as you could also have pressed landing and then simply would say have done that, right? So toggle landing lights will be button number 12. So that's that. Now, of course, we've got still those levelers which we didn't use, right? So to make sure that we're can control the engines individually, we're gonna make sure that we can, let's say, assign them or use 2 different throttles to increase or decrease the speed. Now what you need to do is throttle axis, that simply refers to all the engines, right? So in this case, what we want to do is throttle axis number 1. That will be this leveler, right? That's the second leveler. And throttle number, or engine number 2, sorry, axis will be the other one. This makes it more realistic because then you can control both engines individually. Now, besides that, we of course want to set the flaps, right? The flaps, and we already did that using the buttons. But to make sure that you can also control using the axis, you can set the flaps axis and then move your, let's say, fourth leveler, which makes it more realistic. And that's the leveler number 4 on the quadrant. Now we also have the spoiler, which we didn't discuss yet. And the spoiler one, we're going to assign it to the first one, right? So spoiler, and then use the first one. And then we're good to go to test it, right? So let's first test it. I can't test everything, right? Because I'm on the ground, so I likely don't want to, let's say, don't want to make any change to the gear because that will likely result in a nightmare. So first of all, right? So let's start with those levelers. So let's try to move it, and as you can see, it's moving pretty slowly, but it does work. Everything is fine. Then you can see the throttle, and the throttle removes in the incorrect direction, right? Here's what you can do about it. Go to the settings again, and then make sure that you're, say, setting the throttle to the reverse axis. Now, here's a warning already, because I already saw some people, let's say, making some comments about it, not on my channel, but also on other channels, that it sometimes does work. And that, I would say, that's the weird thing, right? Well, I'm say screwing up the configuration. So let's go again here and then say set invert axis. And now everything should be good. However, what I figured out myself is that it does not always work good. So keep that in mind. In some cases, if you put them in central or in 0 position and then configure them, you don't need to set up the reverse, say, axis. However, if you're still encountering that issue, then say continue to do it, right? You can see that I can control the engines also individually. That works perfectly fine. And then we've got the flaps, which we can move using the fourth leveler, right? That works perfectly fine. So everybody's happy with that. We can do that. The levers on the front are not used, right? That's also, let's say, normal. And then we can start the engines. However, I'm not going to do it because if I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you the external side, then it will likely blow up the engines, right? So let's not do that for now. Which brings us to the parking brake, right? The parking brake, which we can test. Let's do that. Let's see. Can we move this one? It's always a nightmare to find that button, right? Toggle, cover. No. Simply want to remove the yoke. Here we go. And then we can press the button over here, right, to see, okay, hey, parking brake, that works perfectly. Everybody happy? Yes, everybody's happy. That's good. Now, I would say to continue, right? We did the parking brakes. We didn't do the start the engines. We can do it, but I will do it at the end because if then something goes wrong, at least, let's say, nothing, the video isn't screwed. So let's continue with the other buttons. So first of all, there's that arm the auto throttle. In this aircraft, right, that's button over. This is not the auto throttle because this specific aircraft doesn't have the auto throttle functionality. However, if your aircraft has that functionality, you can use that button number 6 on your what is it? Oh, sorry, button number 5 on your quadrant. Then we've got button number 6, which is the toggle reverse thrust. And that's, I would say, a weird thing, right? And here's you can see what happens, right? If you toggle the reverse thrust, you will see that if you press it, then it will go, in this case, to idle mode. And the reason for this, if we would zoom into this, let's say, joystick or throttle, you will see that in this case, this aircraft doesn't have a reverse mode. However, some aircrafts do have the reverse mode. In this case, button number 6 will be useless in this aircraft. However, it could be very useful in other aircraft types, so keep that in mind. Now, with that said, we can continue with the other options, right? First of all, the autopilot. I'm not going to show it because I would say everything is out. But I can show you the taxi lights, for example, right? So the taxi lights, you can find them over here, right? Here are the taxi lights as well as the landing lights. You can switch them on or off, although it might be a little bit hard to see because, of course, we didn't switch on the aircraft, right? So maybe it's time now to start the aircraft, at least to start on the battery, right? Because then we've got some information over here. And in the meantime, I'm also going to, I would say, make sure that the um, other things are there, right? So here you can see the taxi light, right? You can now switch it on or off. You can see it works, as well as the landing light. I pressed the wrong button. Oh no, not sure what's gonna happen now. I switched to the, I would say, press the landing gear option. It only gives the warning. Luckily, it didn't do anything weird. So you can see landing gear also works, right? So that's good. Landing gear up and landing gear down also works. But luckily, we're not screwed because I would say that would be, I would say, a nightmare. Now, as we already discussed, right, there's that one button which is to start the engines. So I'm gonna press that option now. I'm not sure, of course, as mentioned already, I didn't remove those, I would say, red items, which will likely cause some issues. At least I do believe it will cause some issues because, of course, normally you would need to remove them. So if I press the B3 button, it will do the following thing, right? Keep an eye on, let's say, this section and also this one. So if I press that B3 button, you will see that it will start engine number 1 and it goes to the on position. But likely it will fail, right? Because we didn't, let's say, follow the whole process of, let's say, starting the aircraft. But say this is just to show you, hey, it works. But keep that in mind that if you are really doing this in real life, but also in the simulator, you would break the engines. So be careful with this. For now, I'm gonna press the disengage button, which in some cases works, but in this case not. And now you can see all the engines are stopped again, so we're not blowing up the engines. Again, engines are a little bit weird in this controls area, right? If we look at the engines again, as a final, let's say, roundup, you throttle start engine. Was it? You can see that the auto start engine has been set to this one, which will make sure that the engines will start automatically. So first we'll do engine number 1. Once that has been started, we'll do engine number 2, right? It completely depends on what you prefer to do, because as you can see, there are also a lot of other options, but these ones, the magnetos, will likely not work. You can set the starters, right? That's the thing which you can do. Also, if you would not prefer to auto start the engines, so I would say, let's do that for now to see what happens, right? Because I'm also curious about that. If we set starter number 1, we can do it using that button, which was B3. And then, but then you will likely have some issues with the button number, with the other buttons or with the other starters, right? So this is something I could do, but likely it doesn't have a lot of effect, right? Because it's not, does not make really sense if you ask me. Yeah. So what then happens if you press an option, it will go on and off, right? But that's likely because I broke the engines already. But we'll start both engines together, while I think officially in the checklist it says you need to start one engine at a time, which isn't possible using this setup. It would be possible, of course, if you would assign that button number 7 and 8, which are normally used for the flaps, to different engines, right? So just let me show you as a bonus. What you could do is search for engine. And then instead of, let's say, assigning the buttons, which we did assign, of course I can't find it, start engine, right? Set starter engine number 1 to then B7, and then do the other one to B8. And that will also work. In that case, of course, don't forget to remove the flaps entries, right? So click on this one, then click delete, go back, do this next step also for this one. Go to increase flaps, delete the entry, and then you should be good to go. And you can change the starters, whatever you want. Of course, what you could do is, in this case, you're setting the starters. You could also assign them to the toggle the starters, which makes it doable to enable them and disable them. However, there's also the disengage starting button, which is in the middle of both buttons, which will disengage, I would say, engines or both engines at the same time, which I in that case would recommend for this aircraft. So small bonus, if you don't want to use the buttons number 7 and 8 for your flaps, but want to use them to individually start the engines, then you can use that. If you want to auto start the engines, then use this button. Then you can use one button, button number 3, to start both the engines. And here we are at the end of this video again. So in this video, we watched at, I would say, we looked at how to configure the throttle quadrant for the Turtle Beach flight system. It was a little bit hard, right? Not that as easy compared to the single engine because there are so many options and you've got the 2 engines. But at the end, we completed the configuration. The good thing is that you can use this configuration now also for other, I would say, aircrafts with 2 engines, right? So if you would go into your flight simulator, depending on the version you have, you might have some other aircrafts with 2 engines and you might be able to use it there. Here again, a warning. Keep in mind that it really depends on if all the functions are working the same in all the aircrafts, because this is a jet, while it might work differently with the aircrafts with 2 propellers. So keep that in mind. So again, here in this video, thanks for watching this one again. And if you would like to see more videos about how to configure things, or if you've got questions about something, then let me know via the comment box in the comment box below. And then I'm happy to help you and hope to see you back next time.